Please welcome Amy Fitterer, Executive Director of Dance USA.
Welcome, welcome. So welcome to Dance USA's closing plenary. This has really just been a fabulous conference, and it's because of all of you. So thank you so much. I would like to begin by asking Dance USA staff who are able to be in the room with us right now to please stand up so we can give them a round of applause. Woo! Woo-hoo! There's a group of them here, but this conference really would not at all be possible without their tremendous, tremendous hard work. And it really takes, in all honesty, several years in the planning, but the last year or 12 months is really where they are just working extremely hard. And in particular, Kate Folsom, Director of Programs, this was her first conference as our Director of Programs, so congratulations, Kate. I would also like to acknowledge our host partner for this closing plenary, which is the Adrienne Arsh Center for the Performing Arts of Miami-Dade County. And of course, without the lead organizations that helped host this conference, none of this would be possible. So thank you to Miami City Ballet and Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs. Now, I would like to acknowledge the foundations that support Dance USA's programs that include the annual conference, and it is absolutely vital support that helped the programming and the speakers and the venues and for all of this to come together. So I'd like to acknowledge the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, Capizio Ballet Makers Foundation, the Harkness Foundation for Dance, and the Schubert Foundation. Let's have a round of applause. Thank you. I would also like to acknowledge our lead funders, as you can see listed up there, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation and the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs and the Cultural Affairs Council, the Miami-Dade County Mayor, and the Board of County Commissioners. Thank you so much for your support. And we were in these beautiful venues yesterday. So in addition to the Adrienne Arsh Center and the Young Arts Foundation, thank you so much to Miami City Ballet and the New World Center for welcoming us into your space. So this conference comes together with a lot of people working, and we had a wonderful breakfast this morning with some members of the Miami Host Committee to begin to share their ideas with members of the Austin Host Committee and Kansas City. So I really hope that you're getting excited for Austin 2016. Yeah, it's going to be really fun. In addition, I would like to encourage you to keep posting on the mobile app right through this session, because at the end, I'm going to be coming back out. That's right, I see you. Some of you are really vying for those top spots. And I just learned that somebody's now just posting pictures of puppies, and I don't know if we can count that. But that's honestly not up to me. The staff is totally in charge of this. But we will be announcing the top 3 winners of the leaderboard at the very end. So listen closely to what John McCann has to say, post those great quotes so that people who had to fly back today can still feel like they participated in the closing plenary. And just like last year, we will leave this mobile app up and live for a while. I actually think we left the one from Minneapolis up for a year. So you can certainly continue to post into the coming weeks and months as you're digesting and processing information, and you still have all the list of attendees and all of that great information. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our closing speaker, John McCann. I have had the honor of getting to work with John McCann almost now for 2 years. as Dance USA was able to go through the pilot round for the Innovation Lab for Arts Development Agencies. And John McCann, as one of the co-founders of EMC Arts, turned out to be assigned to Dance USA to be our facilitator. I have so much respect for him and the way that he thinks and processes change, and is so up on encouraging us to think about the complex systems in which we work and how to be responsive leaders. John McCann is an educator, facilitator, and consultant. His work focuses on innovation, strategy, and leadership development. John has worked closely with some of the nation's leading arts organizations in prototyping new approaches to greater value creation. These include the Public Theater New York Shakespeare Festival, Dance USA, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and the Martha Graham Center of Contemporary Dance. He is also active in negotiating mergers and new strategic alliances within the arts, including the merger of the Tribeca Film Institute and Renew Media, the merger of Bill T. Jones' Arnie Zane Dance Company and Dance Theater Workshop, and the development of Latino New South, a regional consortium of the Levine Museum of the New South, Atlanta History Center, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and the Global Folk Art Network, a cohort of 25 artists committed to social change movements in their home countries. In the dance world, John has supported strategy development efforts for the Dance Heritage Coalition, Dance Cleveland, Elisa Monte Dance, Washington Ballet, Ballet Met, Dance NYC, Colorado Conservatory of Dance, and the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. McCann designed and now serves as a lead faculty and facilitator for the annual Community Arts Education Leadership Institute for the National Guild for Community Arts Education. Arts Leaders as Cultural Innovators for EMC Arts, and he also serves in supporting the Emerging Leaders Program of the League of American Orchestras. John leads creating a learning organization and team learning activities for the Central Intelligence Agency and ODNI, the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence, just because I guess he has a lot of free time. In his most recent work, he has been with the Women's Regional Network, a highly committed group of peacemakers working in the border regions of India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. It is my pleasure to introduce John McCann.
Well, thank you very much. It is very welcome when people will make up things like that and share them so candidly. Well, I know three things, but before I tell you the three things that I know, and by the way, that's limited to those three things, there was a reference made to the Dance USA staff by Amy. Being around for a couple of years, this is the hardest working, most industrious, thoughtful, pleasant, and committed group of professionals that I've met in our business or our industry of the performing or the visual arts. So just again, hats off to such a lovely and warm, generous, and committed and wise staff. Now to the three things that I know. So we can get this done pretty quickly. We're in Miami. You've been inside rooms like this for 3 days now. And I'm the last man standing between you and the beach. So those are the three things that I know for certain. So I'll try to keep it brisk and have you out on time, maybe before. Being in South Florida reminds me of a line from a Jimmy Buffett song from his album from 1974 called A1A, which I still have in vinyl, but it's been played so often and had so much beer spilled on it that I can't play it anymore, so I had to actually go and buy the cassette and then lost the cassette, and finally I downloaded it at the insistence of my daughter last week so I could listen to this song again, so I have it on my phone. But the line from the song is, if you ever wonder while you ride the carousel. You do it for the stories you can tell. I love that line, and so what I'm going to do today is just take a few minutes to share with you some stories. 3, actually, and I'm going to move out from the podium, and I've got a clicker, and I've got some slides, so we'll start looking at these, and I'll try to walk you through these stories, and then we'll open this up, hopefully, into a conversation that can be useful to you all. Got to make sure this works. I'd like to introduce you to 2 friends of mine. This is Janet. Janet Nukabana is from Rwanda, and this is Rangina Hamidi from Afghanistan. After the genocide in 1990, Janet invited other widowed women to her modest home in Rwanda. And she asked a simple question: what do we do now? From this question grew mornings of 5 to 10 women weaving traditional Rwandan baskets, peace baskets, to what is now Gahaya Links, 40 co-ops across Rwanda, 2,000 women working in alliance, with partnerships across the world and contracts with the likes of Macy's, Anthropology, and others. Rangina returned home from the US after the assassination of her father, the mayor of Kandahar. She recommitted herself to her homeland, and through an underground network of others who had suffered family losses, fathers, husbands, and sons, she started Kandahar Treasures, a loose network of a few, and now, a decade later, 400 women and girls across 40 towns in the province, refusing to remain dependent and making and selling the most extraordinary traditional Afghan fabric and beadwork, selling them around the world, and more importantly, creating independence for themselves through economic opportunity. I know these 2 women well. I'll see them again next month, because they now help spearhead an international force, the Global Folk Art Network, connecting and supporting artists who are making social change around the world, all springing from the small acts of courageous women and Janet's first question: what do we do now? So, the first lesson that I've learned through this experience is that creating the future is about doing. It is not about planning. Yet I see extraordinary amounts of time spent doing the most detailed plans, complete with goals, milestones, benchmarks, strategies, tactics, action steps, role assignments, dashboards. I could go on, but we're limited in time. But yet after 30 years of doing this work, I see little evidence at a fundamental level that much has changed, while the whole world around us has completely shape-shifted over and over again. So why does this matter? I don't quote Jack Welch very often. When the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is in sight. I really find this to be very helpful to me in thinking about, when I'm invited into organizations, what kind of conversations we need to have about the world that lies beyond the boundary of the organization, and the conversations that often happen exclusively inside the organization. So when the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is in sight. Why does this matter? The Army War College in 2003, 2004 actually came up with this phrase that you may have heard before, VUCA. They are not 4 wonderful towns in Italy. They could be Venice, Umbria, what else? Yeah, and Assisi, right? Okay. But they're really about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. What are these things? Volatility is the nature and speed of change. The nature and speed of change. Uncertainty, the lack of predictability, and the prospects for surprise at any given turn. Complexity, the multitude of forces that are at play all at once. All at once, the multitude of forces that are at play. And ambiguity, we live it every day. The haziness of reality that we're in, and the very fact that we have to live in a place of not knowing because of the other three. Case in point, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, all saw their Latino population grow by more than 100% from 2000 to 2011. Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina, this growth over that period from 2010 to 2011 was 500%. So this is just evidence to the rapidness of change as it's happening in the worlds that we have to do our work in. Emily Zimmern, the director of the Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, brought this statistic to her board one day. She said, "You know, as a history museum, we believe history is a bridge across all cultures. Yet we have not one object, not one story in our narrative, not one staff member, not one board member from these Latino communities." And then through a series of events, she was in touch with the History Center in Atlanta and the Civil Rights Institute down in Birmingham, where they were seeing similar dramatic changes in the demographics. They banded together and created a new coalition called Latino New South, which Amy gave reference to. They got together, and just like Janet in Rwanda, when they got together, they said, what do we do now? The answer was, we don't know, but we can find out. Let's go out and listen. Let's go out and simply listen. And as they did, they held 9 listening sessions. One in a Guatemalan restaurant where I was, another in a van driving through Mexican neighborhoods, with whomever would host them and wherever they could be hosted. And they learned tons. And now they are in a formal strategic alliance, complete with MOUs, and in September of this year, a mere 36 months after launching their first listening session, they are launching Nuevolution, Latinos and the New South. And I want to describe the program because it's not about an exhibit, although it begins with the exhibit. The exhibit will be a springboard for programming at the museum and across the community. Then it will move to Atlanta and then to Birmingham. At the Levine Museum, 12 months of public programs, lectures, panel discussion, storytelling, film, music, performing and visual arts will offer a variety of opportunities for participants, Latino and non-Latino, to share their stories and cultural traditions, as well as discuss policy implications of Charlotte's rapid growth and increasing diversity. Dialogues will invite participants to delve more deeply into issues of identity, of culture, and of community issues. Participatory art projects will be offered on-site and off-site. Related pop-up events and activities will happen across the communities of Charlotte and Mecklenburg and beyond. And with new media methods of capturing first-person stories and responses are already underway and will be incorporated into this year's worth of activity. Again, I want to stress this year's worth of activity 36 months after first sitting and beginning to listen and see what could be learned. The sponsorship ranged from Duke Energy, Belk Stores, a major retailer in the region, the Knight Foundation, Wells Fargo, PNC Bank, and critical to the national exposure of the program, the Smithsonian Institution as full partners. So lesson number 2. The future is created when we cross the boundary of our organization and step humbly into our communities. The fact of stepping in and saying we don't know was critical leverage for these 3 organizations to have legitimacy out in their community. What I learned here myself is that good work in the world starts with such humility. We can get too caught up in how good we are and how precious our work is. It was brought home to me recently when I was doing a focus group for an organization. They can remain nameless, yet you would all likely recognize them. When a respondent in the focus group says, you know, when they say excellence, I hear arrogance. Nobody doubts everyone is committed to doing their best work, yet to keep telling everybody can be perceived by our communities as a bit prideful. So to go humbly in, here's a definition that I really have latched on to recently from Edgar Schein, who's actually working in the Arts Leaders as Cultural Innovators program that Amy referred to. The skill and art of drawing someone else out, of asking questions to which you do not already have an answer, of building a relationship based on curiosity and interest in the other person. This is something that the people from the Levine Museum, the Atlanta History Center, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute were able to embody in such wondrous ways that propelled this whole initiative forward at such a rapid pace. And when they were speaking at AAM recently at the American Alliance of Museums, the room was packed because people are yearning to find out how to take these journeys in their own communities. Jiva Theater Center. Jiva Theater Center is located up in Rochester. I met some wonderful folks from Rochester this morning and had a good conversation, which I'm glad is going to continue. The Jiva Theater is a $7 million nonprofit theater based in Rochester, New York. After 4 decades, it had the courage to ask itself some questions. Are we becoming complacent? Are we really capturing and nurturing the imagination as we claim? Are we truly living our commitment to discovery and exploration? Or are we resting on our laurels rather than provoking new thinking? Are there new things required of us? Are there new things that are required of us if we are to matter in the future? Well, someone said in the very first gathering around these questions, we're doing a season of all new work this year. That's pretty risky in itself. So we'll have all these writers in town. What if we put together our playwrights and our community patrons? What if we actually put them together, as opposed to them experience each other through the proscenium and across the fourth wall? What if we actually put them together? We'll see what'll happen. So they created the Cohort Club, sort of like a book club, where patrons were invited into the play development process, not just as observers, but as participants, as catalysts, as questioners, and all through the process, up and through tech night, and then on opening night felt as much like makers as they did audience members. They also created events for patrons and playwrights to jointly participate in. There's a wonderful museum in Rochester called the Museum of Play, and if you've never been, you must at least visit it online because it's quite fascinating. So they created these events for patrons and playwrights to jointly participate in, like going together to that Museum of Play and then having lunch together to discuss their shared experiences, and doing all this not knowing if anything would happen. They call that being vulnerable. So what did happen? Well, the patrons, and I know this because I interviewed them, they said things like, for the first time, I understand what theater is. And I understand why this organization matters to my community, because I see my community reflected through this organization. And for the development directors in the house, 63% of those patrons who participated in these programs increased their giving next year. Try getting that for an added mailing. 63% of those patrons increased their giving the next year. For the playwrights, one said, you know, I get commissions. I go into towns, and I go from the hotel room to the rehearsal hall, and from the rehearsal hall to the hotel room. And then after opening night, I leave. Here in Rochester, I feel I know this town. And these are regional theaters, by the way. I feel I know this town. It's a lot like where I grew up. It really inspired me. Another said, I stood where Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony had their one and only meeting. And I understand it turned into a thunderous argument. I want to come back, and I want to write a play about that because it matters to me and all the people I represent as a playwright. So more awareness and more generous patrons, more intrigued and committed theater makers, significant outcomes. And now these new practices are all embedded into the way Jiva does business. Which brings us to lesson number 3. The future is created when you challenge your most fundamental assumptions and then act on what you learn. So Jiva was really able to do that. It was really able to turn and said, are we complacent? Are we still, in the mind of our people, a leadership organization in this community? Or have we gotten tired? Have we gotten complacent? And are we doing things out of habit as opposed to doing things because they're useful? So asking these questions forced them at a very fundamental level to challenge the notions upon which the theater was built and had operated for 4 decades. So, 3 lessons. It is about doing versus planning. And here's a thing I believe. We have to learn our way into the future. We cannot predict and plan our way into the future. We have to learn our way into the future, and the way we learn is to do stuff and see what happens and have that inform our next steps. We were saying in one of the sessions this morning that I was helping with about risk and fear, and it came up in the room that acting your way into a new way of thinking is much, much preferred over thinking your way into a new way of acting. Why? Because the world is moving so fast. So what all 3 of these stories tell us is you must act your way into a new way of thinking about the work that you're doing, as opposed to pondering and navel-gazing and planning about what our work might mean in the world. So for Janet and Rangina, for Emily and Priscilla and Kate and the people in Atlanta, all those people had to go and act by stepping out into the community and acting their way into a new way of thinking about the role of their enterprise, their institution to the world. And the same was true with the folks at Jiva. After 4 decades, it's easy to say, we got it right, we figured this out. And they realized when they challenged their own notions about it, they had not figured it out. That playwrights wanted to belong to a community when they were there, that patrons wanted to be makers as well as receivers of product that Jiva had gotten very good at dispensing. So do versus plan. We have to learn our way into the future, and the way we learn is to do stuff, and we see what happens. And we have that inform our next steps. Second, be humble and ask good questions. Good questions are questions that meet Edgar Schein's criteria of questions for which you don't have an answer, and questions for whom the listener is the sole authority over their response. The listener is the sole authority over their response. So that's why Edgar calls it both a skill and an art. So you've got to go in with really good questions, right? And the humble part of that is admitting that we don't know the way forward. I mean, if you do, raise your hand. It's hard. We don't know the way forward, right? We don't know the way forward, yet we're confident that together we can find and discover and blaze a new trail. And everything in this world is interconnected, right? So when we go across that boundary and actually sit in our communities, the message we have is we don't know the way forward. But we have a great degree of confidence out of the conversations we'll have that we can blaze that trail forward, craft a way forward that matters to you and falls within the place that we as an organization have in this world. And the third one, challenge your most deeply seated notions. Don't challenge the easy ones. If you do, you'll just tweak things. Challenge your most fundamental, deep-seated notions about purpose, about relevance. Because it may be, like for Jiva, what you thought your mission was 40 years ago has nothing to do with today. or if it has a little to do with today, may have nothing to do with tomorrow. So if your purpose might be inconsistent with what the world needs of us today, maybe our public value resides in new ways of thinking and new ways of acting. And the beauty of it is neither cost us a dime. So to think in new ways and to act in new ways doesn't require grants. It doesn't require a consultant. It requires us just to, I think, take the guidance from these three groups of people who decided that there is a way to be relevant within the world that we live in and influence it in a good way. And for Janet and Rangina in their separate countries, in Rwanda and Afghanistan, turning to the women around the table and said, what is it we do now? And a decade later have a multi-million-dollar global enterprise which is giving these people a degree of independence they've never had before. For Rangina, her network was wholly underground in Kandahar. She was working across this province and created this group of 400 people wholly underground. I know Eric Booth talks about enabling restraints. Now that's an enabling restraint, to have to do all this work underground and achieve this degree of independence for women and girls in Afghanistan through basically going and doing things that you've never tried before, but doing it in a way that involved your community as your chief stakeholder. And again, I want to reinforce that thinking in new ways and acting in new ways is not about budgets. It really is about our own mindsets. You know, we control two things in the world. We control the tape that runs in our head, and we control our own behavior. And that's what this work is about. So as opposed to Janet doing a strategic plan and inviting some women over and say, I want to distribute the strategic plan to you. I'd love for you to look at this with me and see if on page 17 this makes sense to you about what we'll do in month 4 of year 5. And could we get a vote on approving the plan before we go and do anything? Come on. I mean, it's not complicated. It's about putting all that stuff aside. I was in Houston recently. The Houston Symphony Strategic Plan, 2 pages. 2 pages. And this, I think, is about a $40 million enterprise. Big Thought in Dallas, where Gigi and Tony is sort of force of nature, where they bridge between the arts organizations in the community and all the school children in the Dallas public schools. Their strategic plan is one 11 by 14 sheet that's laminated, hangs in everybody's office. And you can talk to Margie Reese, you can talk to Gigi, you can talk to the board. It informs what they call their air game. And then every department has to do their ground game. But boy, just a page, and it orients you toward the future. So now, we've talked about these 3 stories, and I'd like to say that, you know, there is a proven framework. I'm blessed to be a part of that framework where this kind of work can get accomplished. So I'd like to just introduce you to the framework that Amy made reference to, but Dance USA has certainly participated in. And it is called the Innovation Lab. But it's a proven framework, and I think here's why. 50-some organizations have gone through the lab. And I believe that if we surveyed them or talked to them, they'd say this has been useful. Because in this, we have had to confront the notions that drive the way we currently do things. We had to go and do stuff and learn through the doing of stuff. And we have altered our behavior based upon what we learned. So the framework is pretty simple. 3 phases. Imagine a year, okay? 9 months if you like. The first phase is decide for your own organization, what is it that really matters? What is it that really matters? What's a big idea that's been floating but hasn't gotten anywhere? Or what is a challenge that's huge and big and complex that somehow keeps us sort of buttoned down to the way we do things? So identify what that is. And identify that by bringing your whole cast of characters together. This is about dancers and choreographers and board members and donors and audience members and all sitting down and addressing these big questions about big ideas with you, so you have tremendous allies when you decide to move things forward, right? So decide what matters, a complex challenge or a big idea you're willing to learn your way through, not plan your way through, okay? Phase 2, plan an experiment. Listening sessions in Charlotte and Birmingham and Atlanta were experiments. So in Birmingham, for instance, as Priscilla would tell you if she were here from the Civil Rights Institute, she'd say, you know, in '63, we were created out of a black-white reality. And now we live in a technicolor world. And that is a big challenge for us because we are not equipped to understand our new role. But we do believe if we go out across Alabama and we talk and we listen to people, we can learn our way into what our new role is. So that's an example of a big challenge, really complex, that takes a lot of stakeholders investing in making the change that are necessary to move forward. So plan an experiment. The thing about it is the experiment can be tiny, but the intention must be radical. Emily Zimmern, when she had that first listening session in Charlotte, just going to a Guatemalan restaurant, talking to 20 people, having a conversation. Small experiment. The radical intention was to serve the population which has 500% growth in our constituency group when we have nothing in our museum who represents them in any way. So the big, bold intention, why is the intention, the big radical intention important? Because it's what led to this year's worth of programming which I just described for you. So if you're going in to do the experiment without a radical intention, you're just talking. It's a talk shop, and you'll be caught at it immediately. You've got to have an intention behind it that makes it worthwhile to bring people to the table. Plan an experiment with really radical intentions that you're willing to carry out and learn from. And then phase 3 is the really, really fun part. Implement. Go and do that. And what you do as you do it is you learn through the doing. It's an action learning process. You implement and you document like mad all your learning. After every one of those 9 listening sessions, they used the after-action review as a way to understand how good they were getting at their own processes of having a conversation. The after-action review asks 4 questions. 4 questions, neutral questions. Number 1, what did we intend to happen when we went in there and opened the conversation? The second thing is, what really happened? The third question is, and when we look at all that, what did we learn? And since we're going to Birmingham on Saturday, what will we now do differently based on what we've learned? So that's the documenting process. It is not hiring somebody for $60,000 to document stuff for you. It's just sitting down and say, wow, we were just in there for 45 minutes, had a good meal. What did we learn? What did we learn? And let's use these questions as a way to know what we learned. What did we intend when we came in? What actually happened? What did we learn? Let's roster that. And now out of all that stuff we learned, what is the change we can make in the way we do this on Saturday in Birmingham? And by the time they got to number 9, they were damn good at it because they had learned every time to get better and better and better, right? So now I would just offer that as a framework that I think you can take away, because telling you the stories without offering up some way in which you can begin to experiment your way into the future, I think it requires a framework of some sort, some way to think about how do we bring people together and decide what matters. Who would that constituency group be? Often we turn to who? The usual suspects. Who are the unusual suspects in your community that you need to hear from and you've not heard from in a long time or maybe never? So the usual and the unusual suspects in number 1 to help you clarify what it is that's big enough to spend your time behind shaping a new reality around. Phase 2, plan this experiment. Take some time. In the official lab process, like with Dance USA, we had 5 days. We could just sit together. 10 people and just hammer out what you're going to do. And so those decisions to ask staff to go and live and work in other communities for a month and find out what's the dance ecology like in Denver? What's it like in Miami? What kind of discoveries are you making that you can bring back that will allow us to legitimately claim the territory of being the service organization for dance in the nation? That's the kind of experimenting that you do that is so, so learningful. And in 3, just document everything that you're learning, because it is in the learning that we find our way forward. So with that, I am exactly on time, so I will stop talking. Would you stop talking, and we're going to open it up to, I got another slide, right? Oh, open discussion. So So if there's anything that we can talk about, and if we just need to vamp for 15 minutes until CC comes up, we can do that. But I would really love if we could just talk about anything that you've either heard or anything that you would be a contrarian about or anything that made some sense to you. And it's hard to see out there. We've got microphones, but who might we hear from that would have something that they might? Yes?
I have the strategic plan question.
Yes.
Because we're all required to do so. And there's a lot of value that comes in them, but ours is, I'm not going to tell you how many pages it is. It's too embarrassing.
Okay. Can you get it in your suitcase?
Barely.
Barely. I get the idea. Okay, good.
But we use it and it works. We think it works for us.
The room can hear the
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Where's the microphone?
Here, I can do that.
My question was about strategic plans and ours being quite large, and I like the idea that doing that planning is more important, but there's a lot of people in the funding community who would not agree with you and won't give us a dime.
Yeah. Then what I would suggest in that regard is a very authentic, open, legitimate discussion with anybody who is asking you to create these kind of documents as to what they find most useful in that, and then I think find your own way to craft that honors the organization. I have been around for a while. I can't vouch for your reality, but the funders that I've been blessed to work with, I think what they often want to understand is this organization understands its purpose in the world. And it understands the mosaic of the kind of future that it actually can envisage and how that can influence the world we live in. And I find most funders, if that's been figured out with great clarity, they don't need the detail of what you'll do in month 7 of year 5. It is about clarity, not detail. And most of the ones that have staples through them, it's about detail with little clarity. And the detail serves as a poor surrogate for the clarity that the world yearns from, and I would include funders in that. And my own view is that's very legitimate for them to ask for that clarity. So that clear picture of why we matter to the future of the world, right? That clarity, the values that we hold very dear, the core principles that guide the way that we work together, and then some initiating steps that will tell us how to get from A to B. I find most people that's consistent with what they're looking for, and as opposed to wading through 72 pages to find that, it's right there for them. And I only use the Houston Symphony and Big Thought because their plans are so useful to everybody on the staff, because people can anchor themselves in the vision rather than worry about getting things done on the checklist. How do we monitor the progress on strategic planning, quite honestly? We check off the things that we do. All that's telling us is we're really good at staying busy. It is not telling us that we're achieving anything. It just says that we did stuff. So we've got to be really careful, I think, about once we do, if we decide to go with a big, voluminous thing, and we live by the detailed steps that are in there, that if we think progress is exemplified by checking things that we've done on the list, I think we're really cheating ourselves. When progress is really made, how much closer are we to this vision? How much closer, how much more in focus is it? How much more clarity? How many new allies are we bringing to the journey toward there are the bigger questions. But I think sometimes it's the purpose is about checking off lists. So clarity trumps detail would be my response to that question. And again, gosh, get with the funders. I know that there are some here, and just have this conversation one-on-one and said, you know, we could invest heavily in giving you a tome, or we could invest real heavily in getting very clear on our purpose in the world, the way we can influence the future, the way we can influence our community, and see where that goes. I think it's really worth the discussion, yeah. Any other comment or question or thought? Please, we've got 5 minutes to fill here, so. I know you're tired and the beach and the pool await. Is there anything else at all that? Yes.
And just talking about the strategic plan, it's really interesting because we just got a grant about creating a strategic plan, and the plan that we created was much shorter, than the examples that I had on my desk of what it should look like. And the funder actually felt inspired by it and excited by it. So I just wanted to give her an example that actually. I was thinking that they wanted this huge document, and felt scared to turn it into them, what we had, and they actually felt like it worked. But I had a question, because you were talking about the what did we intend to happen? What really happened? And I missed the third question of the series of those 4 questions, because I feel like that's applicable in every single part
in the after-action review. I think the thing I love about it is it's handy, it's tidy. The questions are neutral, so it keeps you away from the blame game about who didn't do something. So the 4 questions are simply about an event that you've had. Can be year-long or an hour. What did we intend to happen? Mm-hmm. So it reminds us again as to purpose, right? The second question is, what actually happened?
Okay.
The third question then is, what did we learn when we look at the intention and what actually happened?
Okay.
And what is it we now do and do differently based on what we've learned?
Great.
So that's the way it is so useful.
Feels applicable to everything.
And it's very good in complex situations where everything isn't neat and tidy. Yeah, it just gives us that. And sometimes the fourth question shouldn't be, how do we reshape everything? What's one shift we would make in the way we did this as we go forward to Birmingham on Saturday, right?
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So useful.
Yes, here and here. Yeah.
We're talking so much about strategic planning. I've always been of the philosophy.
Y'all are talking about strategic planning.
Well, that's true.
Okay,
that's true.
Now go ahead.
I guess my statement is that I always feel like people get confused between crisis management and strategic planning. Mm-hmm. And I've always been a believer that you don't do strategic planning when you're in crisis management. Mm-hmm. And on one of the boards I sit, this has been an ongoing problem because they're so bent on doing strategic planning. And I always feel like if you try to do that when you're in crisis management, you derail long-term thinking by short-term problem solving. Mm-hmm. Just curious what you thought about those.
Well, I don't know about the exact definition you're using about crises. I think we do live in this sort of VUCA place that we described, where everything is rather tenuous, feels ambiguous, feels fuzzy, feels hazy for us, and there's all these competing forces that are working. My feeling on that is that's where purpose matters most. Because if you don't have that anchorage of understanding, what's the mosaic we're trying to create? What's the relationship with the community that would matter? What's the work in the world that really needs tending to by us? I think we really end up in a vicious cycle of we manage the crisis and that spirals us downward, as opposed to giving anybody any aspiration about where we might go next once we move ourselves from crisis to a more steady state. That purpose can really be a driver in that. And asking people, what is it you imagine a decade on, is a way, I think, to sometime not ignore the stresses, but for a moment relieve those stresses which are there every hour, every minute for us, by allowing people to imagine a future that matters to them. And I think that's the way to ask the question, not what the future should matter for us. From where you sit, what is it you see as the world we ought to be trying to influence? And that gets people vested in the discussion, as opposed to making it third party about the organization. And a board member sits in a very different place than maybe a staffer who arrived a week ago. But often the people who arrive new can see our system in ways that we've long ago forgot to see our system in that way, right? So making sure you're giving equity to all those voices about what people imagine as the future. Is that helpful to that question? Okay, over here I think there was...
This will be our last question.
Okay. Better be a good one. the pressure's on.
What you've described is what cybernetics is about systems thinking, all the things that the great philosopher said could not be done because we can only think, as Hegel said, that the owl of Minerva flies only at dusk. We only think about the past. And you've given us all kinds of ways to redo and undo. But we still live in a world of bookkeeping. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think about is, how do I get young students, young scholars to be noticed when their discourse is so different and they don't yet have a track record? So my question to you is, how do we stay in touch with this cybernetic thinking as we want to do it, but so much of our world keeps us looking backward? Can you tell us how we can tap into your discourse as we move in these new ways?
No. Honesty is such a way of relieving all your stress. Just no. But, however, I do have an invitation I would extend to you. I don't know what cybernetics is, and I have to say that cleanly. I don't know what that is, so I wish I did. I might see you afterward and learn. However, this whole thing about being in a budget-driven world, here's the invitation I would make to any of you. I would invite you to just be in touch with me and let me put you in touch with any 3 of these 50 organizations that have worked in new ways. And my sense is, and this is just gut instincts, I have no data to back it up, that fiscally, if they were compared to another sampling, these are healthier organizations fiscally than they were before, about really attacking the things that really matter, which are most complex, which have the most meaning for them. But I would love for you to have those discussions. Like Tom Parrish at Jiva, he'd be happy to have that conversation about, in a budget-driven world, Tom, knowing you've got a bottom line, how did you and your organization move through this adroitly? How did you learn stuff? And how did you embed these practices into what Jiva does? And I think asking Patrick Willingham at the Public, asking any of the people who have done that, ask the people at New York Live Arts about taking 2 big different organizations, moving them into one place. That had all kinds of consequences, intended and otherwise. But there's a great story there to be told about what investing in work like that actually means for an organization. So I think actually talking to those people, so you get the warts and all story, as my dad would say, by warts and all you get the clean, unfettered story about what those journeys are like. I think that's where you could get not answers to your question, but I think where you could have a conversation that could be really useful, okay? All right? Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back, Amy Fitterer and Cece Connor, Chair of the Dance USA Board of Trustees.
Thank you so much, John. Really just, I love your honesty. It is a great stress reliever. And I can tell you that the Innovation Lab experience was truly one of the best experiences that I've had in my 5 years now as the ED of Dance USA. And Cece was on our strategic innovation team and went on the retreat, which was awesome.
And I thought, 5 days? Oh my God, what are we going to talk about? And it was innovating, and it really was great for the organization.
Yeah. So, are you ready? Okay. Oh my gosh, you guys are crazy. So, okay, you all can look at the leaderboard yourselves. 1,937 points goes to Adriana Perez. And I will officially let you all know that I asked the staff, I said, but she's with a funding institution and a government institution, and is this really okay? And they had a whole discussion about it, and they came back to me and they said, it is totally okay because she was posting as herself, and she was a super active participant in this conference, and she totally deserves it. So I was like, okay. So Adriana Perez will get, I think, an executive suite at the hotel in Austin. And then our top number 2 winner for 1,782 points goes to Jonathan Hance. Woohoo! Yes, stand up, Jonathan. Yay. And the final for 1,531 points goes to John Strongs. Yes. So the 2 of you will receive discounts to Austin 2016. Can I also ask the volunteers that are still with us today to please stand up so we can acknowledge your wonderful help at the conference? There have been a lot of volunteers. Thank you so much for your time and your support.
I think this has been such a wonderful experience. And I want to thank all of you for being here, especially those of you who stayed till the bitter end today. Amy said, make sure that you make at least one connection with somebody you didn't know. I know that happened for me. And I hope that all of you were able to have many kernels of knowledge that you're going to take away from this conference. Our staff has done a fabulous job. The host committee in Miami has done a fabulous job. You all have made us feel so warm. But I want us all to acknowledge that the team doesn't work without a great leader. And Amy has been such a great leader to Dance USA for 4.5 years. Amy, you make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll see you in Austin. Woohoo! Thank you.